The sun bleeds red over Rabaul Harbor. It's February 14, 1943. A Japanese Zero pilot named Shigetoshi Kudo banks hard left, his cockpit glass fogged with sweat. Below him, the harbor churns with supply ships. Above him, nothing but empty sky. Then he sees it. A bent-wing silhouette drops from the clouds like a raptor folding its wings. The shape is wrong, too angular, too fast. Kudo's instincts scream. He pulls the stick back hard, climbing vertical into thin air. The American plane doesn't follow. It doesn't need to. It simply levels out, accelerates, and vanishes into the distance before Kudo can even turn his head. He radios back to base. His voice is steady, but his hands shake. New American fighter. Fast. Very fast. The intelligence officer on the ground scribbles notes. He adds a dismissive annotation. Pilot likely disoriented. Americans have no fighter faster than the Zero. That officer was wrong. Dead wrong. Within 6 months, Japanese pilots would develop a doctrine specifically for this new enemy. They called it Haikoki, no Akumatha, devil plane. They stopped engaging it in vertical combat. They stopped chasing it. They stopped laughing. Because the plane Kudo saw that day wasn't just fast, it was the beginning of the end of Japanese air superiority in the Pacific. This is the story of the F4U Corsair, a plane so flawed, the US Navy initially rejected it. So dangerous, its own pilots called it the Ensign Eliminator. So ugly, with its inverted gull wings and long nose, that Japanese intelligence dismissed it as ungainly and ineffective. They mocked its design. They underestimated its firepower. They assumed American engineering had peaked with mediocrity. They were catastrophically mistaken by the war's end. The Corsair would achieve an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft. It would become the most produced American fighter of World War II. It would serve in 3 wars and remain in production for 11 years. But none of that seemed possible in 1943, when the plane was still considered too deadly to its own pilots. The Zero was elegant, light, maneuverable, born from a warrior culture that valued agility and honor in combat. The Corsair was brutal, heavy, built like a sledgehammer wrapped in wings. Born from a nation that valued overwhelming firepower and industrial dominance. One represented the philosophy of the sword, the other, the philosophy of the machine gun. Rabaul Harbor still exists today. The wrecks of Japanese supply ships rest beneath the surface. But the sky above is silent now. No Zeros. No Corsairs. Just memory, and the lesson neither side wanted to learn. Speed kills, but overconfidence kills faster. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Pacific War begins not with symmetry, but with shock. Japanese forces sweep across Southeast Asia like a coordinated storm. Hong Kong falls. Singapore falls. The Philippines fall. And in the sky above it all, the Mitsubishi A6M0 reigns supreme. The Zero is not just a plane, it's a statement. With a range of 1,600 miles, it can escort bombers farther than any Allied fighter. With a climb rate that defies physics, it can reach 20,000 feet in under 8 minutes. With a turning radius so tight, it seems to pivot on air itself. It humiliates every opponent foolish enough to dogfight it. American pilots try, they die. British pilots try, they die. The Zero is untouchable, and the Japanese know it. Pilots from the Imperial Japanese Navy grow confident, then cocky, then careless. Why wouldn't they? The numbers don't lie. In early 1942, the Zero holds a kill ratio of nearly 12-to-1, but there's a hidden cost to that dominance. The Zero is made of aluminum alloy so thin you can dent it with your fist. It has no armor plating, no self-sealing, fuel tanks. One burst from a .50 caliber machine gun turns it into a fireball. Japanese pilots don't complain. They've been trained to accept death as honor. The plane's fragility is philosophically aligned with bushido. You don't need armor if you don't plan to be hit. Across the Pacific, American engineers sit in drafting rooms and stare at reports. The news is grim. Every engagement is a massacre. The Brewster Buffalo is a joke. The Grumman Wildcat is outclassed. The P-40 Warhawk can't climb fast enough. America needs a fighter that can match the Zero in the air and survive the war in the workshop. They need something radical. Enter Vought aircraft. In 1938, 3 years before Pearl Harbor chief designer, Rex Bicel begins sketching a fighter around the most powerful engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. It's a 18-cylinder radial beast producing 2,000 horsepower. No existing fighter uses anything close. The problem? The engine is enormous. To fit a propeller large enough to harness that power, the landing gear would need to be impossibly long. Bicel's solution is strange, unconventional. He inverts the wing's gull shape, bending it downward at the root and angling it up at the tips. This allows shorter, stronger landing gear while keeping the massive propeller clear of the ground. The design looks bizarre, ungainly, like something sketched during a fever dream, but it works. The U.S. Navy orders a prototype. In May 1940, the F4U takes its first flight. It's faster than any American fighter in existence. On October 1, 1940, Test pilot Lyman Bullard pushes it to 404 miles per hour, making it the first U.S. fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight. The Navy is thrilled. They order production immediately. Then reality intrudes. The Corsair is fast, yes, but it's also heavy, nose-heavy, and lethally unforgiving. The long nose blocks forward visibility during landing. The torque from that monster engine causes the plane to stall and snap roll without warning. Rookie pilots approach carrier decks, lose sight of the landing officer, and slam into the stern. Some bounce, some don't. The death toll climbs. The nickname spreads, Ensign Eliminator. The Navy pulls it from carrier duty. It's reassigned to land-based Marine squadrons in the Pacific. The pilots there are experienced, aggressive, and desperate. They need a plane that can kill Zeros. They don't care if it's ugly. They don't care if it's dangerous. They care if it's fast. And the Corsair is very, very fast. Few people today realize that America's deadliest fighter almost never made it to war. February 1943, Guadalcanal. The island is a wound in the Pacific, still bleeding from 6 months of brutal combat. The Japanese have withdrawn their ground forces, but their air raids continue. Every day, bombers escorted by Zeros fly south from Rabaul, hammering Allied positions. Every day, Marine pilots scramble to intercept them. Every day, some don't come back. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington stands on the Coral Airstrip at Fighter Strip 1, watching his mechanics work on a plane he doesn't trust yet. The F4U Corsair. He's heard the rumors. Fast, yes. Deadly, absolutely, but mostly to the pilots flying it. Boyington is 30 years old, which makes him ancient by fighter pilot standards. He's been flying since before the war. He knows machines. He knows limits. And he knows when a plane is trying to kill you. The Corsair sits there like a predator at rest. Its inverted gull wings give it the look of something prehistoric, something that shouldn't fly, but does anyway. The cowling is so long that Boyington can't see over it when taxiing. The cockpit is set far back, making him feel like he's riding a bucking horse instead of piloting an aircraft. Everything about it feels wrong. But the engine, that engine. When the crew chief fires it up, the sound is apocalyptic. The R-2800 Double Wasp doesn't purr, roars. 18 cylinders ignite in sequence, shaking the airframe, shaking the ground, shaking the fillings in Boyington's teeth. He climbs into the cockpit. The smell of oil and hot metal fills his lungs. He adjusts the seat, checks the gauges, and mutters to himself, "If this thing doesn't kill me, maybe it'll kill them." He takes off. The acceleration is obscene. Within seconds, the Corsair is airborne, clawing for altitude with a ferocity no American fighter has ever possessed. Boyington pulls back on the stick. The plane responds instantly, climbing at 3,000 feet per minute. He levels off at 15,000 feet and tests the controls. Stiff, responsive, powerful. He rolls left, then right. The plane moves like it weighs nothing, even though it's one of the heaviest fighters in the war. Then he opens the throttle. The world blurs. The Corsair accelerates past 350 miles per hour, then 370, then 400. Wind screams against the canopy. Boyington's vision, tunnels. He's flying faster than he's ever flown in his life, faster than any Zero can match. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, an American pilot has the advantage of speed. Not just marginal speed, overwhelming, crushing, undeniable speed. He grins. It's not a happy grin. It's the grin of a man who's just been handed a loaded weapon after months of fighting barehanded. 2 weeks later, Boyington leads VMF to 1-4 soon to be known as the Black Sheep Squadron on an intercept mission. Radar picks up a Japanese raid heading south. 24 bombers escorted by 30 Zeros. The odds are terrible. The Marines scramble 8 Corsairs. Boyington's voice crackles over the radio. Stay fast. Stay high. Hit and run. Do not dogfight. The formations meet at 20,000 feet. The Zeros see the Corsairs and immediately assume dominance. They've fought Wildcats before. They've fought Buffaloes. This will be no different. The Zero pilots break formation and climb to engage. Confident in their superior maneuverability, they expect the Americans to turn and burn. To fight the old way, Boyington doesn't turn. He dives. The Corsair screams down from altitude, building speed until the airframe shudders. Boyington picks a Zero, lines up the shot, and squeezes the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns erupt simultaneously, spitting 2,400 rounds per minute. The convergence point is devastating. The Zero disintegrates mid-air, pieces spinning into the ocean below. Boyington doesn't circle back. He pulls up hard, using the Corsair's speed to climb back to altitude. The Zero pilots try to follow. They can't. The Corsair is already gone, already repositioning for another dive. The Japanese pilots are confused. They're used to dictating the terms of engagement. They're used to enemies who fight on their terms. This isn't a fight, it's an execution. Within 10 minutes, 4 Zeros are down. The bombers, now unprotected, scatter. The Marines chase them down one by one, using speed to close distance and firepower to finish the job. By the time the engagement ends, 6 Japanese bombers and 5 Zeros have been destroyed. The Marines lose 1 Corsair to enemy fire, but to engine failure on the return flight. The pilot bails out and is rescued. Back at Guadalcanal, Boyington climbs out of his cockpit. His flight suit is soaked with sweat. His hands are still shaking from adrenaline. The crew chief approaches, grinning. How is she? Boyington lights a cigarette, takes a long drag, and exhales slowly. Mean, fast, perfect. Word spreads quickly. The Japanese pilots radio back to Rabaul. They describe the new American fighter. Fast, heavily armed, uninterested in dogfighting. The intelligence officers take notes. They file reports. They issue warnings. But deep down, they don't believe it yet. They still think the Zero is superior. They still think maneuverability trumps speed. They're about to learn the cost of that assumption. To understand why the Corsair dominated, you must first understand the machine that produced it. Not just the plane itself, but the nation behind it. Because this wasn't just a story about engineering, it was a story about industrial philosophy, economic might, and the terrifying efficiency of American wartime production. In 1941, the United States wasn't just a country. It was a factory. A sprawling, continent-spanning engine of production that had spent the 1930s recovering from the Great Depression by building infrastructure, highways, and manufacturing capacity. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, that engine shifted into total war mode. Within months, automobile factories stopped making cars and started making tanks. Textile mills stopped making clothes and started making parachutes. And aviation companies, like Vought, Grumman, and Boeing, stopped making passenger planes and started making weapons. The numbers are staggering. Almost incomprehensible. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States produced over 300,000 aircraft. That's not a typo. 300,000. Japan, by comparison, produced roughly 76,000. Germany produced 119,000. The U.S. outproduced both Axis powers combined and then doubled it. At the height of production, American factories were rolling out a new aircraft every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Corsair alone saw 12,571 units built. It was manufactured not by one company, but by 3: Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster. They operated assembly lines in Connecticut, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Workers, many of them women, many of them working double shifts, riveted fuselages, installed engines, and tested systems with speed and precision that would make modern manufacturers weep. A single Corsair required 22,000 individual parts. Building one from scratch took roughly 9,000 man-hours. By 1944, that time was cut to 6,000 hours. This was America's secret weapon, not brilliance, not bravery. Scale. Japan couldn't compete, not because their engineers were inferior, they weren't. The Zero was a masterpiece of lightweight design, but Japan's industrial base was fragile. The nation lacked oil, lacked steel, lacked the raw materials necessary for sustained production. Every Zero required imported aluminum. Every engine required imported fuel. And as the war dragged on, American submarines strangled those supply lines. By 1944, Japanese factories were recycling destroyed aircraft just to build new ones. Pilots flew planes held together with salvaged parts and prayers. Meanwhile, American pilots flew planes so abundant they could afford to crash them during training and simply request another. But abundance alone doesn't win wars. The Corsair succeeded because it was designed with a specific philosophy: brute force over finesse. Japanese aircraft emphasized agility, lightness, and range. American aircraft emphasized firepower, durability, and survivability. The Corsair embodied that philosophy completely. Its armament was overwhelming. 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 3 per wing, each loaded with 400 rounds. That's 2,400 rounds of ammunition, fired at a combined rate of 4,800 rounds per minute. The convergence point where all 6 streams of bullets met was roughly 1,000 feet ahead of the aircraft. Anything caught in that cone of fire didn't just take damage, it disintegrated. Compare that to the Zero, which carried to 7.7 millimeters machine guns and 220 millimeters cannons. Deadly, yes, but with far less total firepower and far less ammunition. A Zero pilot had to make every shot count. A Corsair pilot could afford to miss. He had bullets to spare. Then there was durability. The Corsair's airframe was built from thick aluminum alloy and reinforced steel. It had armor plating behind the pilot's seat. It had self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb gunfire without exploding. Corsairs routinely returned to base with dozens of bullet holes, missing pieces of wing, and shattered canopies. Their pilots walked away. Zeros, hit by a single .50 caliber round, often didn't make it home. American engineers didn't just design a fighter. They designed a survivor. And then there was training. By 1943, American pilots arriving in the Pacific had logged 300 to 400 hours of flight time before seeing combat. They practiced gunnery, navigation, formation, flying, and emergency procedures until they could execute them in their sleep. Japanese pilots, by contrast, received increasingly abbreviated training as the war progressed. Veteran pilots died faster than they could be replaced. By 1944, some Japanese pilots entered combat with fewer than 100 hours of total flight time. They were brave, they were determined, but they were inexperienced. The Corsair didn't just outfight the Zero. It outlasted it, outproduced it, overwhelmed it with sheer industrial momentum. Few people today realize that wars aren't won by the best soldiers or the best weapons. They're won by logistics, supply chains, and the unglamorous labor of factory workers who never saw the battlefield. The Corsair was fast and deadly, yes, but its true power came from the assembly lines in Ohio, the aluminum smelters in Pennsylvania, and the cargo ships that hauled parts across the Pacific without being sunk. Japan fought with honor. America fought with factories. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence officers stopped dismissing the Corsair. They stopped mocking its design. They issued tactical bulletins warning pilots to avoid prolonged engagements. They developed new doctrines. Don't chase it. Don't climb with it. Don't let it dictate the fight. But doctrine means nothing when you're outnumbered 3-1. Flying a plane held together with spare parts. And facing an enemy who can afford to lose 10 aircraft for every one you destroy. The Zero was a sword. The Corsair was a factory that made swords obsolete. And the factory never stopped running. Rabaul, April 1943. The Japanese base is still operational, still dangerous. But the confidence that once filled the briefing rooms has begun to crack. Intelligence reports pile up on desks. More Corsairs sighted. More engagements lost. More pilots not returning. The pattern is undeniable now. Something has changed in the air war. Commander Masajiro Kawato sits in one of those briefing rooms, listening to a pilot describe his most recent encounter. The pilot's voice is steady, but his hands aren't. 6 of them, he says. They didn't dogfight. They dove from above, fired, and climbed away before we could react. We couldn't catch them. We couldn't even turn fast enough to line up a shot. Kawato knows this pilot. He's been flying since 1941. He's shot down 8 Allied aircraft. He's not inexperienced, and he's not a coward. But something in his eyes has changed. It's not fear, exactly. It's realization, the understanding that the rules have shifted, that the dominance Japan once enjoyed is slipping away like water through clenched fists. The intelligence officer speaks next. He's younger, less experienced in combat, but he studied the reports. The American plane is the F4U Corsair, he says. Maximum speed, 417 miles per hour. Climb rate, 3,120 feet per minute. Armament, 6.50 caliber machine guns. Range, 1,000 miles. He pauses, then adds, it's faster than the Zero in level flight. It's faster in a dive. It climbs faster. And it has more firepower. Silence fills the room. Someone finally speaks. But it can't turn like the Zero. No, the intelligence officer agrees. It can't, but they're not turning. That's the point. They've developed new tactics. They're using speed and altitude to control the engagement. They dictate when the fight starts and when it ends. We can't force them to dogfight. Kawato feels the weight of those words. For 2 years, Japanese pilots have relied on one fundamental truth: the Zero's superior maneuverability. In a turning fight, the Zero wins. Always. But if the Americans refuse to turn, if they simply dive, shoot, and climb away, then that advantage means nothing. It's like bringing a sword to a gunfight and discovering your opponent won't come close enough to be cut. Tactical adjustments are issued. Pilots are instructed to maintain altitude, to avoid diving after Corsairs, to stay in tight formations. But everyone in that room knows the truth. Doctrine can't overcome physics. If the enemy is faster, and if the enemy refuses to fight on your terms, then you're not dictating the battle anymore. You're surviving it. By summer 1943, the psychological shift is complete. Japanese pilots no longer laugh when they see the bent wing silhouette. They don't underestimate it. They respect it, and in some cases, they fear it. The Corsair has become Hikoki no Akuma, the devil plane, a nickname that spreads through the ranks like a dark prayer. Pilots tell stories about it in the barracks, stories that grow more ominous with each telling. Some are true, some are exaggerated. It doesn't matter. The mythology is real now. Meanwhile, American pilots grow bolder. They've learned the Corsair's strengths and weaknesses. They know not to dogfight. They know to maintain energy, to use speed as both weapon and shield. Squadron leaders develop tactics specifically designed around the Corsair's capabilities. The thatch weave, the boom and zoom, the high-side gun pass. These aren't desperate improvisations. They're calculated, repeatable strategies that turn American numerical and technological advantages into systematic victories. The numbers reflect the shift. In early 1943, the kill ratio in the Pacific is roughly even. By late 1943, it's tilted decisively in favor of the Americans. By 1944, it will be 10-1. By 1945, some Marine squadrons flying Corsairs achieve ratios as high as 15-1. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, becomes prey. But there's something deeper happening here. something beyond tactics and technology. It's a philosophical reckoning. Japan entered the war believing in the superiority of spirit over material, of skill over mass production, of the warrior ethos over industrial might. The Zero embodied that belief. It was light, agile, elegant, a plane that required mastery to fly well and rewarded pilots who embraced risk. The Corsair represented the opposite. It was heavy, brutal, forgiving of mistakes. It didn't require a master pilot. It required a competent one with good training and overwhelming support. It was a weapon designed not for honor, but for efficiency, not for individual brilliance, but for scalpel, repeatable victory. And it was winning. Kawato sits alone after the briefing, staring at a map of the Pacific. The blue markers representing American forces have multiplied. The red markers, representing Japanese positions, have dwindled. He knows what's coming. Everyone knows. The question isn't whether Japan can win. The question is how long they can delay the inevitable. Outside, the sun sets over Rabaul Harbor. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of aircraft engines drifts on the wind. Kawato doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. He already knows what kind of plane it is. October 1944. The Philippines. Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, unfolds across 100,000 square miles of ocean. Japanese carriers, battleships, and cruisers converge in a desperate gambit to halt the American invasion. It's a last stand, a final attempt to turn the tide of a war already lost. The Imperial Japanese Navy commits nearly everything it has left. The sky above is chaos. Corsairs from Marine squadrons and Navy carriers fill the air like a swarm. Their engines roar in synchronized fury, a mechanized thunder that drowns out the sound of anti-aircraft fire and the screams of dying men. Below, Japanese ships maneuver frantically, their decks crowded with sailors who've never seen this many American planes at once. They shoot at anything that moves. The sky fills with black bursts of flak, but it's not enough. It's never enough anymore. A Corsair piloted by Lieutenant Robert Cowboy Klingman dives toward a Japanese destroyer. The ship's guns track him, firing in desperation. Klingman doesn't flinch. He's 22 years old, from Texas, and he's been flying Corsairs for 8 months. 8 months is a lifetime in this war. He knows the plane's limits better than he knows his own. He pushes the stick forward, accelerating through 400 miles per hour. The dive's so steep his vision tunnels and his body presses hard into the seat. At 1,500 feet. He pulls the trigger. 6 guns erupt. Tracer rounds arc downward in glowing streams, converging on the destroyer's superstructure. Metal tears. Glass shatters. Men fall. Klingman pulls up hard, the G-forces crushing him into the seat, his vision graying at the edges. The Corsair groans under the strain, but holds together. It always holds together. He climbs back to altitude and circles. Below, the destroyer lists, smoke pouring from its deck. It's done. He looks for another target. The battle lasts for days. By the time it ends, the Imperial Japanese Navy has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. 4 carriers sunk. 3 battleships sunk. 10 cruisers destroyed. Dozens of smaller vessels obliterated. The Americans lose 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, and a handful of destroyers. The disparity is staggering. It's not a battle. It's an extermination, and Corsairs are everywhere. They strafe retreating ships. They escort bombers targeting supply depots. They intercept the few remaining Zero squadrons with cold, mechanical efficiency. There's no drama anymore. No tense dogfights where skill and courage determine the outcome. Just math. Just industrial dominance. Just the sound of machine guns and the sight of planes falling into the sea. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakiwan, of the war's greatest aces, credited with 64 kills, survives an encounter with a Corsair during this period. Later, he'll write about it. His description is haunting. The Corsair was faster than anything we had. It climbed better. It could absorb damage that would destroy our planes. And it never ran out of ammunition. Fighting it was like fighting a machine that felt no pain and never grew tired. Sakai is right. The Corsair is a machine. But so are the men flying it. In a sense, they're cogs in a vast, grinding system of production, training, and logistics that never stops, never slows, never questions whether it should. They're interchangeable parts in a war machine that has learned to manufacture victory the way Ford manufactures cars. By early 1945, the Pacific Air War is over in everything but name. The Zero still flies, but in dwindling numbers. Pilots still climb into cockpits and take off, but fewer of them return. Japan's industrial base is crippled. Its fuel supplies are gone. Its best pilots are dead. The ones who remain are boys teenagers with 50 hours of flight time, sent to die in planes that are falling apart mid-flight. The Corsair, meanwhile, continues to evolve. New variants appear. The F4U enters service with a more powerful engine, better climb rate, and upgraded armament. It can reach 446 miles per hour faster than any production Japanese aircraft. Pilots call it the Super Corsair. Ground crews joke that it's overpowered, as if such a thing were possible in war. There's a story. perhaps apocryphal, of a Japanese pilot who bailed out over the ocean after his Zero was shot down by a Corsair. He was picked up by an American destroyer. When asked what it was like to fight the Americans, he said, through a translator, "It was like being hunted by gods." That's the truth of it. Not because American pilots were gods. They weren't. They were human, scared, exhausted, homesick. But they were human beings backed by a system so vast, so efficient, so relentless that it might as well have been divine. They flew planes that didn't break. They fired guns that didn't run dry. They came home to carriers, stocked with fuel, food, and replacement parts. The Japanese flew planes held together with wire and hope. Speed kills. But overwhelming, systematic, industrial dominance kills entire empires. The engines thunder. The guns roar. The ocean swallows the wreckage. And still, the Corsairs fly. August 15, 1945. The war ends, not with a final dogfight, but with silence. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles over radios across Japan, announcing surrender. The words are formal, euphemistic, carefully chosen to preserve dignity while admitting defeat. The war situation has developed, not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Pilots listen in disbelief. Some cry, some rage, many simply sit in silence, too exhausted to feel anything at all. On distant Pacific islands and aircraft carriers, American pilots receive the news differently. There's celebration, yes, shouting, embracing, the sudden release of tension held for years. But there's also something quieter, a strange emptiness. For months, they've lived with the singular purpose of survival and victory. Now, abruptly, that purpose is gone. What do you do when the enemy stops appearing in your gun sight? When the engines cool and the ammunition belts are packed away, the Corsair doesn't stop flying. Not immediately. Thousands remain in service. They patrol occupation zones. They fly over Japan during the surrender ceremonies. Some are shipped home. Some are mothballed, parked in vast desert boneyards where they sit like monuments to industrial overkill. Some are simply pushed off the decks of carriers into the ocean, cheaper than transporting them home. The numbers are surreal. Over the course of the war, Corsairs flew 64,051 combat missions. They destroyed 2,140 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They sank or damaged hundreds of ships. They dropped thousands of tons of bombs. And they achieved that 11-to-1 kill ratio, the highest of any American fighter in the Pacific. But statistics don't capture the human cost. 189 Corsairs were lost to enemy action. Many more crashed during training or due to mechanical failure. Pilots died, some in combat, some during carrier landings, some in accidents that could have been prevented if the plane had been easier to fly. The nickname Ensign Eliminator wasn't a joke. It was a eulogy. And yet, the pilots who survived speak of the Corsair with something approaching reverence. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, who became an ace flying Corsairs with VMF-214, later said, "It was a mean, unforgiving son of a bitch, but it brought me home." He was shot down in January 1944, spent 20 months as a PO, and returned to receive the Medal of Honor. He never flew another plane that felt as powerful in Japan. The aftermath is quieter. Airfields lie empty. Hangar doors hang open, exposing the skeletons of burned-out Zeros. Pilots who survived the war return to a country in ruins. Their skills suddenly obsolete. Some become farmers. Some become teachers. Some never speak of the war again. Commander Masajiro Kawato survives. He writes a memoir decades later, published in Japanese, largely unread outside of Japan. In it, he describes the moment he realized the war was lost, not when the bombs fell, not when the emperor surrendered, but the first time he saw a Corsair refuse to dogfight. "We had built our doctrine on the assumption that courage and skill would prevail," he writes, "but the Americans didn't fight with courage alone. They fought with systems, and systems do not tire." There's a philosophical weight to that observation. Japan entered the war believing in the supremacy of willpower. In the samurai ideal, that spirit could overcome material disadvantage. The Corsair, the system that produced it, proved otherwise. Not because willpower is meaningless, but because it's insufficient when facing an opponent who has both willpower and 10 times the resources. The Corsair itself continued flying long after Japan surrendered. It served in the Korean War, where it flew ground attack missions with devastating effectiveness. It served with the French in Indochina. It remained in production until 1952, longer than any other piston engine fighter in U.S. history. Some nations, like Honduras, flew Corsairs into the 1960s. The last recorded combat mission flown by a Corsair occurred in 1969. Think about that. A plane designed in 1938 was still being used in combat 31 years later. That's not just engineering excellence. That's a testament to the philosophy behind it. Build something brutal, functional, and nearly indestructible. Build it so well that it outlasts the war it was designed to fight. Today, a few dozen Corsairs remain airworthy, flying at air shows and historical demonstrations. Their engines still thunder. Their bent wings still cut through the sky. Old men stand on flight lines, watching them pass, And remember, silence hums where engines once roared. But memory doesn't fade as easily as sound. Here is the truth that history tries to soften, but shouldn't. Wars are not won by the bravest soldiers or the most brilliant generals. They're won by the side that can outproduce, outsupply, and outlast the enemy. Courage matters. Strategy matters. But logistics, industry, and sheer material dominance matter more. The Corsair proved that it wasn't the most beautiful fighter of world. War II. That honor goes to aircraft like the Supermarine Spitfire. With its elegant elliptical wings and graceful lines, it wasn't the mass maneuverable. The Zero retained that distinction until the very end. It wasn't even the easiest to fly. Pilots cursed its long nose, its torque stall, its tendency to kill inexperienced aviators during landing. But it was the most effective, and in war, effectiveness is the only metric that matters. The Japanese pilots who laughed at the Corsair in 1943 weren't fools. They were rational actors making assessments based on the information available to them. The plane looked ungainly. Its design seemed overcomplicated. Its initial performance in carrier trials was disastrous. By every aesthetic and traditional measure, it appeared inferior to the refined elegance of the Zero. But aesthetics don't win wars. Neither does tradition. What wins wars is the willingness to abandon beautiful ideas in favor of brutal ones. To choose overwhelming firepower over graceful maneuverability, to accept that a plane doesn't need to be easy to fly if you can train pilots well enough to master it. To understand that the factory worker riveting fuselages in Connecticut is as crucial to victory as the pilot firing guns over the Pacific. The Corsair embodied American industrial philosophy. If it works, build more of it. If it's too heavy, add a bigger engine. If it's dangerous, train better pilots. If it's ugly, who cares? Speed and firepower don't require beauty. They require commitment. And America was committed. 12,571 Corsairs. Each one a statement. Each one a hammer blow against an empire that believed spirit could triumph over steel. There's a lesson here that extends beyond aviation, beyond World War II, beyond even military history. It's about the danger of underestimating systems. The Japanese didn't just underestimate a plane, they underestimated the entire civilization that produced it. They saw America as soft, materialistic, lacking in warrior spirit. They believed that a nation of factory workers and immigrants couldn't match the discipline and honor of the samurai tradition. They were wrong, not because spirit doesn't matter, but because spirit, combined with industrial might, is unstoppable. The Corsair killed 2,140 enemy aircraft, not because it was flown by supermen, but because it was flown by well-trained, adequately rested pilots who knew that if they went down, another pilot and another Corsair would take their place. The system was larger than any individual. The system was the weapon. Few people today understand that. We romanticize individual heroism, the lone ace, the brilliant tactician, the underdog victory. And those stories are real. They matter, but they're incomplete. Behind every ace was a logistics officer ensuring fuel deliveries. Behind every brilliant tactic was a factory producing enough planes to implement it. Behind every underdog victory was a supply chain that didn't collapse. The Corsair is a reminder that greatness often looks ugly, that the most effective solutions are rarely the most elegant ones, that winning requires not just doing things well, but doing them at scale, repeatedly, without mercy or hesitation. If you're still here, you value these forgotten truths. You understand that history isn't just about the famous battles and celebrated heroes. It's about the systems, the choices, and the philosophies that determined outcomes long before the first shot was fired. Keep these truths alive. Share them. Remember them, because the world still underestimates systems, still believes that passion alone can overcome organization, still laughs at the ugly, brutal solutions until those solutions win. The Japanese pilots stopped laughing sometime in 1943. By 1945, there was nothing left to laugh about. Today, the Pacific sky is silent. No Zeros, no Corsairs, just a memory of what happens when elegance meets overwhelming force. The engines are silent now, but the lesson still thunders.